If everyone could please stand if they'd like to for the reading of the Council Prayer and the Acknowledgement of Country, and I'll call upon Councillor Hollingsworth to read the Council Prayer. Sorry, we've had a bit of a seat change.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Almighty God, we humbly seek your blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of the city of Boroondara. Amen. Thank you.
And I'll now call upon Councillor Galt to read the Acknowledgement of Country.
I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people as the traditional owners and original custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today.
Thank you, and please be seated. So welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. The council meeting is being live streamed on the council website, so you'll be able to view the proceedings of the meeting, councillor deliberations and voting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the council website soon after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if needed, the meeting will be postponed. My name is Councillor Jane Addis, Mayor of the City of Boroondara, and I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. Seated to my left at the horseshoe table in the chamber are Councillor Victor Franco, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Councillor Nick Stavrou, Councillor Wes Galt, our Deputy Mayor, and Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth. And then starting from me, again on the opposite side, we have Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Susan Bigger, Councillor Gary Thompson, and Councillor Di Gillies. Officers in attendance tonight: Philip Storer, Chief Executive Officer; Carolyn McLean, Director, Community Support; Daniel Freer, Director, Places and Spaces; Mance Bassey, Director, Customer and Transformation; Brian Wee, Manager, Governance and Legal; and Kirsten Ritchie, Coordinator, Governance. And there are also a number of other officers in attendance this evening, and they'll be introduced as they present their reports. So the first item is apologies. Mr. Wee, are there any apologies for this evening?
Through you, Mayor Addis, Councillor Watson is an apology.
Thank you very much. Adoption and confirmation of the minutes of the council meeting held on 26 April 2022. Councillors, can I have a motion to adopt and confirm? Councillor Sinfield?
So moved.
And a second to Councillor Bigger?
Yes.
Thank you. Is anyone opposed to that motion? There being no one opposed, I'll declare the motion carried. Next item is declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? I believe we might have Councillor Bigger, Councillor Gillies and Councillor Thompson. And that, I think we're going to bring it up in general business.
That's
Thank
correct.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll note that for when we get to general business. Our next item is deputations, presentations, petitions and public submissions. Deputations, presentations and public submissions. I believe there are none. Petitions. Mr. Wee.
Mayor Addis, there is one council has received one petition. The details are set out in the papers. The petition is opposing the intrusion of a new car park zone into the green space of Willsmere Park.
Thank you. Councillors, is anyone prepared to move a motion to receive and note the petition as printed on our papers? Yes, Councillor Sinfield,
Happy to.
and seconded. Councillor Franco, were you moving to second? Thank you.
Happy to.
Thank you. Is anyone opposed to that? Thank you, Councillor. So I'll declare that motion carried. The next item is informal meetings of councillors. And is anyone prepared to move a motion to receive and note the record of informal meetings of councillors as were printed in our business papers? Councillor Galt
So moved.
and Councillor Hollingsworth, second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone opposed? No, thank you. So I'll declare the motion carried. Our next item is public question time. Council encourages the submission of public questions prior to 12 on the day of the meeting. Questions submitted prior to 12 will be provided with a detailed verbal response as well as a response in writing. Those submitted after 12 will receive a verbal response if possible, but will otherwise be taken on notice for a written response to be provided in due course. Mr Wee, do we have any public questions?
Madam Mayor, tonight we have 7 questions with notice from 6 members of the community.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn to the questions. The first question is Tony Yukono. Are you in the chamber or maybe online? So I'll read the question, which is aloud. So the question is, why was the Cycle Path project not conducted together with Manager Open Space? And the question has been allowed in accordance with Chapter 2 of the Governance Rules, as the question has previously been put in writing to a councillor more than 10 days before the council meeting at which the question submitted. And I believe Mr Freer, Director of Places and Spaces, will respond to Mr Yukono's question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. The development of the new Boroondara bicycle strategy commenced with an initial phase of community and stakeholder engagement undertaking during the 1920 financial year, as well as drawing on the advice and input from various internal departments, including our Environmental Sustainability and Open Space Department in the development of the draft strategy. In relation to inviting the Manager of Open Spaces to the residents' site meeting recently held, Council's Traffic and Transport Department initiated the meeting, given the development of the strategy is being managed by that team. There was a request by a resident for an officer from Council's Parks team to also attend the meeting at very short notice. This request could not be achieved given the limited notice and that one of the officers had contracted COVID-19 and the other relevant officer was already committed to another meeting. This was conveyed to the public meeting by officers in attendance, and an offer has been made for a further meeting to be arranged if required.
Thank you, Mr Freer. And Mr Yukono, you will receive a written response to your question in due course. Our next question, which is aloud, is from Carol Hunt of Baldwin. And the question is, can Council guarantee that Hislop Park will retain its designated dog off-leash status? The question is allowed, again in accordance with Chapter 2 of the Governance Rules, as it was put in writing more than 10 days before this meeting that it's been submitted at. And again, I'm going to call upon Daniel Freer, Director Places and Spaces, to respond to Mrs Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, there are no plans to change the designated dog off-lead status of Hislop Park as part of any works associated with the draft Boroondara bicycle strategy.
Thanks, Mr Freer. And Mrs Hunt will receive a written response in due course. The next question is from Geraldine Hopper of East Kew. The question is not being allowed. It doesn't relate to an item listed on the council agenda for this evening, and the question was not received more than 10 working days before the council meeting at which the question is submitted, and that's in accordance with Chapter 2 of the Governance Rules. However, Ms Hopper will receive a written response from council in due course. Thank you. The next question is from Franklin Rosenfeld of Balwyn North. This question is allowed, and the question is, how will you avoid the disruptions to the two playgrounds, one in Jacker Street Park and the other in Greythorn Park, that are right next to the widened path? And the question is allowed because it relates to a matter or matters regarding item 7.2 on the council agenda. And again, Mr Freer will respond to the question from Mr Rosenfeld.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and again through you. The existing paths in these reserves typically cater for local access and are not suitable as cycling commuter routes. Due to the mix of on-road and off-road sections, the link is indirect with several road crossings of major roads. With the exceptions of schools, there are no major trip-generating destinations in the area that would encourage commuter cyclists to use this path or corridor, and provisions of existing direct on-road cycle lanes in Belmore Road and to the north in the Koonung Trail. The proposal included in the draft bicycle strategy would involve assessing and upgrading existing paths used by both pedestrians and cyclists through Greythorn Park and Jacker Street to provide an unsealed gravelled path at a width of 3 metres in line with current design standards. However, given further work undertaken by council officers, an upgrade of the path through Greythorn Park is unlikely to be achieved. As such, this consideration of its removal from the revised draft strategy has been given and will be subject to formal consideration by council at a future council meeting. The existing concrete path through Jacker Street Reserve is narrow at 1.5 metres, but in good condition with long expected lifespan. Given this consideration of the proposal to explore future opportunities to reconstruct the same path as an unsealed gravel path is some time away. The revised draft strategy will consider all community and stakeholder feedback and return to council for formal consideration at a future meeting.
Thank you, Mr Freer. And Mr Rosenfeld will receive a written response as well. The next question is from David Crawford of Balwyn, and the question is allowed. Does the council have any indication of the likely increase in usage by cyclists of the shared pathway in the King Street chain section of the proposed 2022 draft Boroondara bicycle strategy once it is established? And the reason the question's allowed is because it's been put in writing to a councillor more than 10 days before the council meeting at which the question is being submitted. And again, Daniel Freer, Director of Places and Spaces, will respond to Mr Crawford's question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. The proposal for King Street Chain in the draft bicycle strategy essentially involves maintenance of the existing gravel paths. The existing gravel paths in these parks and reserves are not intended to be sealed. Instead, the emphasis is on maintaining these gravel paths as that to ensure they are fit for purpose. While it is difficult to accurately predict the likely increase in cyclist usage of these paths, the proposals are focused on maintenance of the existing unsealed paths and, as not such, expected to attract a large increase in cycling activity. By comparison of cyclist numbers on the Anniversary Trail near Chandler Highway and at Whitehorse Road, through the period of 2010 to 2019 revealed annual increases in the order of 0.8% to 2.5%.
Thank you, Mr Frere, and Mr Crawford will receive a written response. The next two questions are from Ian Huntley of Balwyn North. Now, the two questions have been disallowed because they don't relate to an item listed on the council agenda for this evening, nor were they put to council 10 days before the meeting. But both of the questions will receive a written response. So that's the end of the questions. Thank you. So our next item is notices of motion. Mr Weed, do we have any notices of motion?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no notices of motion.
Thank you. We'll now turn to presentation of officer reports. And I just wanted to check if any councillor has an issue with or a concern with the items on the agenda and the order that we have them listed as, or if there are any that anyone would like to move an en bloc motion for. Nothing, Councillor Thompson?
I'd certainly like to discuss item 7.1 and 7.2.
Mm-hmm. And then we have 3, 4 and 5. Does everyone want to discuss them?
I'd like to discuss 7.3. Thank you.
Yep. 4 and 5?
I'd like to say a few things about 7.4.
Okay, and then 7.5, I believe. Okay.
Thank you.
So everyone happy to follow the set agenda? So the first item is 7.1, which is Amendment C333, Part 1 and 2, Glen Iris Heritage Gap Study, Adoption and Abandonment. And that's going to be introduced by Christian Wilmson, Coordinator Strategic Planning. Thanks, Mr Wilmson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. The purpose of this report is to seek Council's adoption of Amendment C333 Part 2 and abandonment of Amendment C333 Part 1 to the Burundara Planning Scheme, following the decision by the Urban Planning Delegated Committee on the 2nd of May. The amendment seeks to implement the recommendations of the Glen Iris Heritage Gap Study, which was exhibited in February and March 2021 and considered by an independent planning panel in late 2021. The panel generally supported the amendment and recommended adoption subject to some key changes. The most significant of those changes was the non-support for the Mont Iris Estate and Environs Precinct and recommending abandoning that precinct and undertaking a further review as part of a separate process. The panel also recommended a number of grading changes and property exclusions in the Summerhill Estate Precinct and some changes to heritage citations for a number of individual properties, including 14 and 19 Alfred Road and 148 Summerhill Road. Officers generally supported the recommendations by the panel, except a few of the property exclusions and grading changes in the Summerhill Estate Precinct. The Urban Planning Committee accepted the officers' recommendation and resolved to split the amendment into two parts, with Part 1 relating to the Mont Iris Estate and Environs Precinct to be abandoned, and Part 2 relating to all other precincts, 3 of them, and the individual properties. Officers recommend abandoning the Mont Iris Estate and Environs Precinct and adopting Part 2. And officers also note that there'll be a further report in due course on the outcomes of the review of the Mont Iris Estate Precinct brought to the Chamber. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Thompson?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to foreshadow a motion as well, but I do have one question of officers. With regards to, is it easily discernible through our website with regards to assisting residents understand what they can and can't do within a heritage overlay, e.g. Carports, those sorts of things, fence replacement, etc.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Madam Mayor, there's a wealth of information on Council's website. There is a test, I believe, as well, where people can step-by-step guide as to when a planning permit is required. If there's any uncertainty over whether a planning permit is required, Council Statutory Planning Department is also there to answer any questions and can provide detailed advice with regards to proposals either in writing or through setting up a meeting with Council's Heritage Advisor and officers to discuss a particular proposal.
Thank you. And I'm happy to foreshadow a motion.
Thank you. I can't see any other lights on for questions, so Councillor Thompson, your motion.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. It is the officer's recommendation. Look, this is fairly... I'll need a second before I go on.
Yep, Councillor Franco, you're happy to second? Thank you. So I'll hand back to you, Councillor Thompson.
Look, this is very administrative with regards to the previous decisions in hearing community submissions was made at the Urban Planning Committee earlier this month. Certainly agree with the abandonment of Part 1, which we know will come back to us at some future point, not too far away, with regards to a possible smaller precinct and the adoption of Part 2, which is a fairly intact precinct. So I wholeheartedly support this and look forward to the support of colleagues.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. As there's nobody opposed, Councillor Franco, did you wish to say anything?
No, thank you. I think Councillor Thompson has covered all the issues.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, are you happy for us to just put the motion now? Thank you. So all those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's carried unanimously. And thank you, Mr Wilmson. So item 7.2, Gardeners Creek Draft Master Plan, and that's going to be presented by David Shepherd, Manager Environmental Sustainability and Open Spaces. Thanks, Mr Shepherd.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to present a draft master plan for Gardeners Creek for council approval to commence community consultation. Gardeners Creek is a key waterway, vegetation and active transport corridor with lots of opportunities still for improvement. The draft master plan sets out those opportunities to seek to improve creek health and improve access and safety for all of the users of the corridor. Alongside the master plan, there's also collaborative work happening in relation to Gardeners Creek with other councils, Melbourne Water and local community groups, which makes this an excellent time for council to confirm its commitment to the corridor and the catchment through this master plan. The master plan will help us provide consistency in our actions with others and the potential to collaborate effectively in seeking funding allocations to undertake key projects. Thanks to our councillor advisory group who have helped drive this project and given us guidance to get to this point. If the draft master plan is approved, consultation will be undertaken over the next 6 weeks and then a revised master plan presented to council for adoption. The officer recommendation is on the screen and I commend that to you tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr Shepherd. Councillor Thompson and then Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and I'll also foreshadow I might have a motion on this one, but I do have a couple of questions. And this is, I guess, in light of us about to put this out for consultation. I've had some community concerns. 4 questions through you, Madam Mayor, if I can, to the officers. Are we allowing the spraying of glyphosate or other synthetic herbicides next to the Glen Iris wetlands?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The spraying that we undertake next to Glen Iris wetlands is undertaken with low or non-scheduled herbicides to minimise any other environmental impacts. The herbicides that we use have been approved by Melbourne Water for use in that space and in fact are the same herbicides that they utilise in their works along the creek and other areas as well.
Thank Recently, we've conducted a number of community workshops with our climate action plan. Is it feasible that our weed management is leading to a diminished population or impact on, one, butterflies, frogs, given that there hasn't been a drought for 10 years, and also bees?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it is feasible, but we don't have that data at hand. It is something that we could investigate in detail if we can find historical records of butterflies and frogs and the other item that you mentioned that I've forgotten, bees.
Bees.
We could do that research and understand if there was an impact as a result of our works. In saying that, though, we are mindful of environmental impacts in all of the works that we undertake, and we are undertaking them in accordance with the label instructions in I guess, combination with a range of other weed management approaches so that we are minimising the environmental impact and getting the best outcomes for our biodiversity.
Thank you. Third question, do we have a conflict where we've got edible weeds, which is another part of our Climate Action Plan program, with our current approach to herbicides?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we don't have a clear picture of where all the edible weeds are in Boroondara, so again, that is an exercise that we could undertake to understand that picture better. Our weed management approach is about enhancing our biodiversity rather than taking away from it, but we could understand that picture a little bit better if you wanted that to be pursued.
Thank you. And my last question, is it possible for council to trial an organic herbicide in environmentally sensitive areas for a 12-month period? And could this be considered after the feedback that we get from the community on this Glen Iris master plan, Gardeners Creek master plan?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it is feasible that we could undertake a trial like that. Of course, Deakin University did undertake a trial last year as well that considered a range of chemical herbicides, organic plant-based herbicides, organic acid-based herbicides, alongside steaming. And the outcomes of that result were that glyphosate was the most effective and cost-efficient in terms of eradicating weeds. But we certainly could consider undertaking our own trial and seeing the impacts in our own environment.
Is that report publicly available?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that report is publicly available. The peer review article came out late last year.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr Shepherd, I just wanted to ask if the Back Creek Reserve tributary is referenced in the Gardeners Creek master plan. It's recently been brought to my attention that that's to some extent significant as a tributary to Gardeners Creek. And I'm looking at the maps here, and sorry, just to give you a point of reference. So on page 16 of 50, it's item 5, destinations at the Gardner Creek catchment. I can see there's a dark blue dotted line, and I don't know if that has any reference to tributary or not, but just wondering if you're able to answer that for me.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the focus on Back Creek within the Gardeners Creek master plan is more about the water rather than the adjoining land areas. There's a small extent where Back Creek does join Gardeners Creek that the land around that area is considered as part of the master plan, but primarily the focus is on the water quality coming from Back Creek and the impacts that has on Gardeners Creek.
Yeah. So, sorry, that's not referenced in the master plan, the tributaries? No.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there is a reference to Back Creek and to other tributaries, but primarily around the water quality.
Right, thank you. Are you able to... Look, I'll take it offline. You could perhaps direct me to where it's referenced later. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Franco.
Thank you. A question regarding procedure. In relation to the draft officer's recommendation, point 2 says that it would be brought to a future meeting of council. Does that require it to be a council meeting per se, or could it be a committee meeting, or does it exclude either option?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it could come to a services meeting to enable public questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger, you're pausing at your light. You have a question?
I do. I was just trying to recall whether it was in there, but whether or not we have, there's anything to the officers, whether or not there's anything in the draft master plan regarding specifics like a litter trap. I think we've talked about that. Has that been included?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there's no specific sites identified for litter traps in the master plan, but we do have the intention coming out of this to develop a litter and pollution plan for this particular catchment and indeed broader for Burundara as well. It is one of the recommended actions within the report.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. So I can't see any other lights. Councillor Thompson, you foreshadowed a motion.
Yes, Madam Mayor, it's the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. And Councillor Bigger, you're seconding that motion?
Yes, please.
Thank you. For the benefit of the mover and the seconder, is anyone opposed? No, so I'll go to Councillor Thompson to speak to his motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd firstly like to start by acknowledging that the officers who've played a vital role in pulling together this Gardeners Creek Master Plan, noting that in doing so we've had collaboration not only with our neighbours in Stonington but also councils upstream. And that's a critical aspect with regards to how we all collectively address Gardeners Creek. It's vitally important that there's a collaborative approach. And from that, there are a number of groups that are also working towards that approach as well, with associations occurring within the community. Gardeners Creek, and this is referenced in the report, Gardeners Creek is one of the highest contributing sources of contaminants into the Yarra River system. And it's been one for a number of years. It's slowly starting to improve with the works that our colleagues across the river in Stonington with their master plan, but it is something that needs a lot of work over a number of years. So this master plan really starts to touch on a whole series of aspects that are vitally important from a biodiversity perspective, from a pollutants and a rubbish collection perspective, in addition to the wonderful asset that we've all come to love, particularly through pandemics, the access to the recreational, both passive and active, along the corridor, which is quite critical. So it's a valued asset. Very much looking forward to our community feedback on this. I think it's a wonderful initiative that we're preparing. It'd be really great, as to Councillor Franco's comment before, to maybe consider the opportunity for the community to actually present to us when we actually deliberate on this. I think that would be wonderful, but I wholeheartedly support this and encourage everyone to do so. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Yeah. And we can do that. Okay. So, Councillor Thompson, there's an opportunity to change the resolution slightly to reflect that. I'm happy to test that, Madam Mayor. If there's no support for it, I'll revert back to the original motion. But if it can, thank you, Councillor Park, for alerting me to that. If it can come to a services delegated committee and the seconder is happy to accept that as well. Okay, I'll just check whether anyone's opposed to the small change. Okay, thank you. Councillor Bigger, did you wish to speak as the seconder?
No, I'm happy with what Councillor Thompson said.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, you...
Look, I have nothing further to add other than to thank colleagues for supporting that minor change. I know that recognises that we all have a number of our residents presenting to us, but it is vitally important to hear from them in this regard before we consider it in its final adoption. Notwithstanding, I think it's incumbent on our community to provide us the feedback in the interim through our website so that we can gather those comments and respond to those appropriately. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. So I'll now put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, Mr Shepherd. Item 7.3, discontinuance of roads and reserves policy, and that's going to be introduced by Rebecca Dewar, Acting Coordinator, Revenue and Property Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, this report is asking Council to consider and adopt the revised discontinuance of roads and reserves policy as attached to the papers you have before you. The policy documents how roads and reserves no longer reasonably required for access, no longer required for the purpose for which they were originally set aside, and or roads being closed for any other purpose will be discontinued and sold or transferred. It was identified that the current policy did not adequately address the means of dealing with encroachments fronting properties. Additionally, a recent experience has highlighted the need for the current policy to contemplate additional sale methods when disposing of discontinued roads where purchase agreements cannot be reached with neighbouring properties or with councils offering. As such, the policy was revised to address these issues. Thank you and happy to take any questions.
Councillors, are there questions? Councillor Franco?
Thank you. It's correct, is it not? This is the question, that the policy focuses firstly on trying to find a shared agreed solution to an established market price before going to auction of the land as a final recourse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. We certainly look first to, we've never done an auction before. We do try to negotiate the sale terms prior, in line with the policy principles, prior to bringing it to council. Yes.
And this question, I wonder if I might direct it to the CEO. It's based on the conversation at the last council meeting, and and I appreciate the work's gone into it, but my understanding is that sometimes our past approach has resulted in one portion of the land perhaps not being sold, and I wonder whether there's value not putting, based on that, is there value having an equal weighting to auction as an option that allows us to explore that?
Yes, thank you. The way in which we've tried to approach the question is to say that if we're unable to get both parties to actually take a share of the land, then we would look to auction the land in the hope that the one party who might be looking initially to take half of it would in fact be interested in the whole of it. So we have that option available to us now, which wasn't there before. It's not our preference to obviously end up with a scenario where we've got a narrow strip still in council's ownership and with some responsibility for that. So I think that the revisions which have been suggested lead us to a better outcome in terms of avoiding that scenario.
Thank you. I have another question on a separate matter which relates to adverse possession. I've received some advice, but is it not the case that we could seek a greater amount of funds rather than, say, $9,000 or an index going forward based on other factors such as, one, the time and effort and energy in addition to the cost that an applicant would have to make to undertake an adverse possession claim, and secondly, is an adverse possession claim still possible when if in order to sell land that's a road reserve, we have to terminate that road reserve, convert it to council-titled land and then sell it. But is a adverse possession claim still possible under those circumstances?
Once council obtains title to the land, it's not possible to make an adverse possession claim. However, we have had situations where council has become aware of land which is maybe been fenced in by an abutting owner, They've done nothing about an adverse possession claim. We show an interest in the land, and they then lodge an adverse possession claim. Our experience is that when an adverse possession claim is lodged, it will be dealt with in advance of a proposal for a discontinuance and a vesting of the land in council, so council can then take title to it. That's been our experience up to this point in time.
So if we identify the possibility of land that could be subject to an adverse possession claim, but such a claim has not been lodged, then our process should be, to bring that into council's ownership, and then if we wish to sell it at the full market price rather than at the discounted price.
Correct. So what it comes back to is the response of the owner of the land, where that land's been taken in. If that owner initiates an adverse possession claim, then that leads us down the path the current policy foreshadows. If they don't, and we have pursued the closure and investing of the land in council's name, then we would end up exactly as you've described. We would be in a position to achieve a higher return for the land.
And the final question, I mean, 9,000 seems very low. Is that benchmarked on actual legal costs, an estimate thereof?
Yes, Ms Montalti and I were discussing this this afternoon, and we both feel that your assessment is correct, that $9,000 is too low. What we'll be doing is asking our lawyers to do a revision and ensuring we've got all of the relevant survey costs and the legal costs and so on built into that figure. So we may be coming back to you and suggesting that figure be revised.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Franco. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is possibly to the CEO through you, just in relation to the discussion we had and the decision we made on the 9th of May at the Services Delegated Committee. Item 1, I think it was in relation to a discontinuance in a subdivision at Weybridge Street in Surrey Hills. On that, we had robust discussion on the night, and I think there were probably some learnings out of that and from the process that is yet to finalise. I'm wondering whether it is premature to make a decision on this tonight prior to learning the lessons of that case.
I think what we've done with this is to design it so that it creates a range of possibilities depending upon the circumstance which arises. So I don't believe you're closing any doors by adopting this approach. The auction outcome which has been proposed there will allow not only the abutting owners to show interest, but anybody else who may have an interest in that land could actually bid for it. There's nothing in the draft which would prevent any of that from happening, and indeed I think that it will be a very interesting experiment for us to actually see how that progresses. I would like to come back to councillors after that so that we're aware of how that has in fact played out in reality, but I don't think there's anything in here which is closing any doors. It's simply creating a range of options which we can choose having regard to the way in which the abutting owners have chosen to respond.
Thank you. And a follow-up, if I may. Is there urgency and time pressure attached to this piece of policy to be resolved tonight?
No, the only benefit is that when we have matters raised with us during the course of the normal business week, we are able to provide more certain responses when we've got a document like this adopted. Failing that, we would need to fall back to the previous policy position and we would apply that.
Thank you. I think that finishes my questions.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My line of questioning is very similar to Councillor Sinfield, but through looking at page 8 of 14 of the document, under item 4.2.3, I do have a question, if I may, and it's with regard to division of land. In the second paragraph, it talks about purchasing part of the land adjoining their property, the full area may be offered to the other adjoining property owners for purchase in the event that a shared agreement isn't raised. And it uses the word may be offered. And then paragraph 3 directly under, it says, in the event the property owners cannot agree upon the proposed subdivision and sharing of the land to be sold, the land will be sold on the open market to the highest bidder. And my question is, should that word will be sold, may be sold? So it gives council some discretionary power. So it's just one word change I'm seeking.
I think the difficulty with going to may is that you create uncertainty for the staff as to how they ought to proceed. The starting point with the policy is that where there are two neighbours abutting land which is going to go through this process, our key principle has been to ensure that each owner has the ability to access a half share at the rate at which the policy describes. The scenario we've had is that one owner doesn't agree with the proposal to create that half share in the way in which we've experienced it in the past, so it's a half share of frontage. The policy is therefore saying if in that circumstance we wish to still achieve our objective, which is to actually sell the land, not end up owning it, then what we would do is put it on the open market to give ourselves the best chance of achieving that core objective. That's really what we're seeking to do. And so I think it's better that we have clarity as to how we proceed in the event that the normal approach doesn't apply. So I would be more comfortable with the word will, because it's very clear for officers as to how they are to proceed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Park.
I'd like to foreshadow a motion and essentially, given that the CEO has indicated there's no urgency with this being dealt with tonight, the thrust of the motion would be that it be referred to a meeting of CB&D. I'd have a number of questions I'd like to ask, but I think given that the questions and answers have the ability to prejudice council in respect of transactions of this nature, I'd rather not do them here, and I don't think that it seems to me that there's sufficient interest in getting this policy right that we'd benefit from a discussion. So,
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Sinfield.
I would second such a motion.
Let's see if there are any other questions. I can't see any lights on, so Councillor Park, your motion is essentially that we bring it back to
CB&D. Ideally, I'm not sure if officers have any indication of the likely timing of the auction in respect of the property mentioned by Councillor Sinfield, but following that might be a good time.
Mr. Storer? No,
We have no detail yet as to the date of the auction, but the point is taken. That's not a problem at all to bring it back once that's done.
Okay, let's pause for a minute and get some words to make sure they're what you're seeking.
Can I make a comment on Councillor Park's proposed motion, because it might change his thinking?
Should we see it first, or do you?
I'm happy to hear it.
Yep.
I wonder whether we need a motion to refer this to CB&D, which is a confidential discussion of councillors, and simply defer the matter, and we choose to. I don't think we need a motion to that effect. We simply defer the matter.
Yeah, well, I'm waiting for the words, but whatever.
Because personally, I'd feel uncomfortable passing a motion that refers something to a confidential session that's a discussion.
It would still have to
that
come
makes sense.
back.
It'll come back.
But I'm happy to defer the item. And do we even need a motion to defer it?
Yes.
Defer it for consideration to a future meeting?
Let's wait and see what the words are that Councillor Park was seeking, and then see if he would like to
I'm happy to be guided by what officers want to draft and...
Maybe we can respond to that.
Through Madam Mayor, I suggest that the appropriate way to respond is in line with what Councillor Franco has suggested, that you simply defer it and we use the mechanisms available to us for you to have another conversation.
Yep, that's fine. That'll be my motion.
And Councillor Sinfield, you are happy to second that?
I am, thank you.
Okay, so to assist the mover and the seconder, is anyone opposed to those words? Nobody is. Councillor Park, do you wish
Happy to put the motion.
Okay, and Councillor Sinfield, I'm presuming? Okay, so all those in favour of the motion up on the screen, thank you. That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. And thank you, Ms Dewar. Our next item, 7.4, recommendations of Audit and Risk Committee meeting, and that's going to be introduced by Brian Wee, Manager, Governance and Legal. Thanks, Mr Wee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, this report presents the recommendations of the most recent Audit and Risk Committee, which was held on the 30th of March. As recorded in the minutes of that meeting, 12 reports were tabled, and a summary of the reports and the identified action for Council is set out in attachment 1 to your papers. The officer's recommendation is that Council resolve to adopt the resolutions recommended to Council by that committee, reflected in the recommendations and the attachment 1 to your papers.
Thank you, Mr Wee. Does anyone have questions? Councillor Stavrou?
No questions, Madam Mayor. Foreshadow motion.
Thank you. I can't see any other lights on for questions, so would you like to tell us what your motion is, Councillor Stavrou?
I would like to move the officer's recommendation, please.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder? Councillor Thompson?
Happy to second, thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone opposed to that motion? So I'll go back to Councillor Stavrou to talk to his motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you, and I'll be really brief about this. First, I thank the officers for the update and the quality papers they provide the Risk and Audit Committee. Look, the issue that I'd like to raise, and particularly for our community, is that in the attachment, the first item highlights really what I would call an iceberg risk, where there's an innocuous, appearance of a tip, but there's a lot more in the under the surface of that. And this risk relates, excuse me, arises from the state government proposing to place the auditing of combustible cladding under Council's responsibility. I think this is not unacceptable, as it places unquantifiable and unmeasurable risks, and as such cannot be accepted and should be managed within states' larger resources. I'd say also, in addition, that this is a risk that's wholly created by state government policy, and it's far better for it to manage this risk under its capacity, given that it's created through its policies, and really not appropriate to offload it to Council, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stavrou. Councillor Thompson, did you wish to add anything?
No, I think Councillor Stavrou summed up that perfectly from my perspective. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stavrou, are you happy for me to put the motion, or would you like to say something more to close? No.
Nothing further to say, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll now put the motion, which is up on the screen. Those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. So the next item is 7.5, proposed City of Borondara motions for the Municipal Association of Victoria State Council on 24 June 2022. And again, that's going to be introduced by Brian Wee, Manager, Governance and Legal. Thanks, Mr Wee. Thank you,
Madam Mayor. This report informs councillors of two proposed motions for the City of Boroondara to put forward to the Municipal Association of Victoria State Council. That meeting is on Friday the 24th of June. Motions that are carried by the MAV State Council becomes resolutions, and these resolutions are considered by the MAV board when setting a strategic work plan for the MAV. The next meeting, as I mentioned, would be held on the 24th of June, and motions are required to be received by the MAV no later than Friday, the 27th of May. There are two motions which are attached to the papers. Motion 1 is maternal child health, submitted by Community Support Group. And motion 2 relates to the Office of the Victorian Government Architect funding reduction, submitted by Urban Living.
Thank you. Questions for Mr Wee? Councillor Hollingsworth?
Foreshadow a motion, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Yes, Councillor Franco?
I have a question to Mr Wee. I accept you may not know the answer, but do we know if there's a motion to be considered at the MAV State Conference in relation to the issue of development applications being transformative and that being a criterion that once again can be considered by VCAT and council planning officers?
It's not a question I can answer at this point, Councillor. It's a question I can take on notice after examining the matters before the State Council.
Thank you.
Mr Storer was going to add something. Thanks, Mr Wee.
Thank you. Mr Wee just touched, I think, on the point I was going to make, which is that there will be a report coming to you which lists all of the proposed motions to be put across the whole of the local government sector. So you'll be able to see exactly how that's being proposed or not. If you wanted to be certain of there being something, then there would be an opportunity this evening to actually propose something which we could draft. If it's already being approached by someone else, what the MAV normally does is they look at like motions and merge them into one. So if you feel you would like to test something with your colleagues, that's possible for you to do this evening in the same way that Councillor Hollingsworth, I think, is about to.
Thank you. I'm a bit loath to do so on the run, and if there is such a motion, which my understanding, I've been led to believe that there is such a one, I wouldn't. But if there's timing when that report comes out with sufficient time for councillors to review, it's probably would it be too late at that point?
I would need to check the exact dates, but I think we can do our best to try and accommodate you. I'm not sure whether you've got the dates, Mr Wee. Do you have the dates? Not on hand. Perhaps if you could leave that with us. If we need to, we may need to bring it before council for a consideration prior to that next report coming forward to you.
Thank you. That would be good. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any other lights on, so Councillor Hollingsworth, you have a motion you'd like to propose?
Look, I'd like to propose an amendment motion. Thank you. As you can see, that's on the screen now. So what I'd like to do is
see if there's a seconder. Yes. So is everyone happy to, can they read it from the screen or?
I was just going to say it's just supporting the officer's recommendation with the inclusion of one extra motion. Thank you.
Councillor Park, you have a...
I'm just confused about what a mortarium is.
Might be moratorium,
yes. If I could assist, I... Right, thank you. Good pick up. Okay. I don't believe that was in the original draft. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll pause for a minute. Is anyone happy to second Councillor Sinfield?
I am.
Okay. Can I check whether anyone's opposed to that? Councillor Park's looking...
I really had a question, and I meant to ask it when it was circulated, and that's simply, was there some moratorium in existence? If I could ask that, through your indulgence.
Yep, you happy to?
Perhaps if I could just address two things. One is that the Energy Safe Victoria has introduced a new fines regime, if you like, and they are increasing their surveillance of non-compliance with regard to the code. There's been a period of time which they gave to local government to try and achieve compliance before deciding to apply a more stringent fines regime. That time, I think, has largely expired, and therefore we are facing fines if they choose to be somewhat narrow in their approach to this. The second thing, just from a eyes wide open perspective to say, is that the MAV rules don't allow a motion to be put twice. So when a motion's already been put previously, they don't allow it to be put again. This is somewhat different in that it makes reference to a moratorium regarding fines, and therefore may well be able to pass the test.
You're comfortable with that, Councillor Park? Yep. Okay, so we'll return to Councillor Hollingsworth to speak to her motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I wanted to thank Carolyn McLean for, as the Director of Community Support, for putting forward the first motion that's referred to in the reports that's on our website and that we have circulation of, and that's with regard to the support for maternal, child and welfare. And look, I won't go into too much detail because obviously the motion put forward explains it, but in essence it's trying to convince the state to revert back to a 50-50 ratio with support of providing service to our community. And as we all know, the very early years of infants are very vital in their development, and they need sound professional support from our maternal welfare officers for the mother and obviously for the infant as well. And our second motion is to do with something that recently came to our attention with regard to the Office of the Victorian Government Architect, where funding has been reduced by the state to support their services, and their services are very vital to ensure that we have structure and oversight and a power to have intervention if need be on state buildings, whether it be public housing, hospitals, or even design of precincts for town centres. So to have the actual Office of Victorian Government Architect be afforded the opportunity to retain their full budget and full resource of funding to allow them to do their job independent is very important. And obviously the inclusion now of the third motion, which has been discussed, is resubmitting a motion we put at 21st of May last year that was strongly supported by all in attendance at the State Council meeting, and unfortunately hasn't had a lot of traction yet, but it's a very important issue that we appeal to gain support to reduce the impact and the cost penalties of our nature strip vegetation, because at the moment with the electric power line clearance compliance issues, as we all know, we're seeing very, very serious canopy reduction of our nature strip trees, and our loss of canopy trees is not good for our environment, it's not good for our climate, and we need to do more to protect them. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Sinfield, as the seconder, did you wish to add anything?
No, thank you. I think it's been covered.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth, are you happy for me now just to put the motion?
Thank you.
So I'll put the motion that's up on the screen. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Our next item is general business. Now, I do know we have 3 councillors who have declared a conflict in relation to leave. I'm thinking that we might try and do them all together for expediency, but maybe we need to just check the dates before we allow you to declare your conflict and leave. So, Councillor Biggar, Tuesday 31st May to Monday 13th of June?
Correct.
Okay. Councillor Gillies, 1st of June, Wednesday to Friday 10th?
Thank you, yes.
And Councillor Thompson, 20th of June.
That's correct.
So all of you are declaring a conflict of interest? Thank
correct.
you. So would you like to leave briefly? I think we're still going to have enough numbers for quorum. Oh, and Councillor Hollingsworth, you had one too.
Look, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to give notice that on the 20th of June, I'll be attending a meeting representing Burundara Council, so I'll be away that evening as well. So I presume I will need to complete a conflict of interest.
So you're seeking leave for that evening in the same way the
yeah.
others are?
To fulfil a council obligation, yes.
Okay, let's just check. Are we going to have enough of us left? Just. So 20th of June yours was?
Just the one night, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I think we've got enough numbers still. Okay, now are we going to be able to somehow put them up one by one, or is everyone happy that they heard what I'm
happy to move a collective motion.
And assume that the dates we checked are correct? Thank you. Anyone happy to second? Yep, Councillor Sinfield. Is anyone opposed? So we'll declare that carried. Thank you. And other matters, Councillor Thompson, I believe you may have another matter of general business.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. And I think through you it would be prudent to, upon the official declaration of the poll, acknowledge or write to, or particularly from the Mayor, write to the Honourable Josh Frydenberg MP and thank him for his service to the Kooyong community for 12 years. And to write to Dr Monique Ryan as the incoming MP for Kooyong and wish her all the best for her term as MP, and likewise for Dr Katie Allen, MP, who served 3 years for Higgins, and to acknowledge the incoming MP, Dr Michelle Ananda-Raja, as well, and to thank her.
Thank you. So I'm assuming we can just do that everyone's in favour? Yes, we'll just do it. Thank you very much. Any other items of general business? Thank you. Items of urgent business. Are there any items of urgent business? No, thank you. Confidential business. Can't see any lights. Thank you. So we've now reached the end of our council business for this evening, and I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us, both online and in the chamber, and wish you all good health. And I'll now declare the council meeting closed at a little after 7:30. So thank you everyone and goodbye.